Hey everyone, welcome back to Big Strong Book. I'm Reed, and today we are going over chapter 27 of the Dragonbone Chair, the Gossamer Towers. So right away, kind of following last chapter with all of almost the lore that was revealed, and Jaloe determining that the group has to go to Dai Chikiza, an old Scythy stronghold. She wakes them up in the middle of the night and says, "Hey, this lake, my lake, has been discovered. Like there are men who have discovered it, and they've got to go." And so they eventually set out on this very almost like a log type boat that Jaloe provides to Maria, Benebik, Kantaka, and of course Simon. And Jaloe, informs them, or not informs them, but she confirms that she will be holding on to Lelith. Lelith still needs time to heal. Lelith was, of course, the girl who was with Maria, and so the three, the troll, the two, teenagers, and the wolf head off, and they notice a scatter of tents. That's what Simon notices, and he notices, I believe, maybe the color. Yes, a striped blue tent. And it just says here, this is page 420, 420. Now they could see several more, a crowd of 3 or 4 just behind the first. Simon scowled, then smiled disdainfully. How typical of the Baron Heathforth, from what he had heard in the days at the castle anyways, to carry such luxuries out into the wild forest. And as they go, they see a lookout, and they're kind of going along. They're going along the lake. They see the man, the basically a lookout, and then all of a sudden an owl comes, and of course we have that imagery of Jaloe and owls. The owl comes and kind of distracts that guy, so then they can paddle ahead. Or I guess now they're into a river, not necessarily still the lake. and then at this point, then Simon makes, like, just in his internal monologue, just because he starts to think about Maria, because of course he thought that Maria was Malachias. He thought that she was a boy, and so now that he knows that she's a girl his own age. And so now, the wheels are turning a little bit in his head. It's just something that just made me laugh reading it. He says, he thinks, she's not well padded, not like Hepzibah. Huh, I'd like to see Hepzibah pass as a boy. Still, she's pretty in a kind of thin way. Her hair's so very black. and then Simon Benebik disrupts Simon's thoughts by saying, "Well made, is she not?" And Simon kind of freaks out, and he's like, "Whoa, what are you talking about?" And then Simon was referring to the boat, and he called the boat, she, because it's kind of the traditional way to refer to any type of watercraft. You refer to it, by, female pronouns, like, I think of Titanic and mentioning she. And then Simon just says, "The boat," and it says, nodding like a village idiot, "The boat, yes, it is well made." And then he just kind of randomly asks Maria, Simon does, he's like, "How old are you?" And she's like, "I'm 15." And Simon's like, "Okay, I'm 15 too." And then Benebik coughed. "Well, and good that shipmates should have acquaintance of each other, but perhaps later. Simon, could you go to see if those are indeed rocks ahead?" And again, like, ugh. I love, these, obviously, because Simon, Benedict, and now Kintaka, and of course now that Maria has joined their company. I really appreciate these moments of levity. And this chapter, while this chapter ends on a very severe note, it has moments of levity throughout. And I think I enjoyed this because even though they are just traveling, the chapters in any sort of novel, particularly within fantasy novels, work best when there are just these moments of levity, these character moments when they're taking in the world around them, and they're not necessarily, I mean, they are in peril in a basic sense, but they're not in constant peril. Um, and so they leave the river, and they decide to go to uh, kind of, I believe, to the other side. And the elf went. And so they carry the boat. It's very light. They carry it over, and as they're rowing along, Simon starts singing a song about Osiris and Tiagoras and King John. And Benedict likes it. And he's like, "What? Why did you stop?" And Simon's like, "Well, that's all I know of it. That's all that was ever sung to me when I was a kid." And then Maria says, "Well, I know a song I learned from the time when I lived in Merrimond." And Simon's like, "Merrimond? You were a castle girl. How'd you ever go to Merrimond?" And uh, and Maria says, "Well, where do you think the princess came before the Hayhilt? I am one of her servants, right?" And so she sings a song about Merrimond. And Simon starts singing so much, and it gets to the point where he is singing at the top of his lungs. When the nose of the boat dipped down into a trough and bounced up, they were among the rocks again. By the time they had negotiated the roiling waters and were out into the clear, they were all too breathless for singing. Simon, however, was still grinning, and as the gray clouds above the forest roof opened, showering down more rain, he tilted his chin up and caught the drops on his tongue. I love these little moments. And Benedict almost gives a dire warning to Maria, kind of when they make camp, because Maria, of course, mentioned in last chapter that she is going to Nagleman to give a message to Joshua. And Benedict asks her, "Well, what if Joshua's not at Nagleman?" Because they've all been operating under this assumption the whole time that they'll get there, and that Joshua, or a lot of these friends, Joshua's court, the group of his cronies. I mean, just like Elias has his cronies, so Joshua definitely has his as well. And so that unsettles them a little bit. But then they start to go forwards, and as they go forwards, again, getting closer and closer to Dai Chikiza, Simon asks a question kind of about the nature of Jaloi. And Benedict tells her a little bit about her. Like, basically that they shouldn't be super concerned that the Baron's men could take her out. And he says, to think of her only as a village-wise woman is to be making a mistake Heathfirth's men may regret if they do not treat her with respect. A long time Velada Jaloi has walked Osten Ard. She has been many years in the forest, and many, many years before that among the Rimmersgarders. Even preceding that, she was coming up from the south into Naben, and her travels before no one knows. She is one who can be trusted for taking care of herself, far more than I, or even, as was proved with such sadness, that good man Morganus. And then, again, as they make, a lot of this is like their travel, they make camp, they travel, they make camp. But they make camp again, and Simon almost tries to, do the thing that, I mean, really, I can think of, you know, as myself, like young boys to old men probably try to do the weirdest things to impress women. And Simon kind of reaches in. He's like, "Oh, look at the white arrow. This was shot at me. Ooh, I survived." And he's trying to, he's trying to impress Maria. And, or excuse me, they're not at camp. They're still in the boat. And then, and Simon just kind of says, "Well, I might throw this away. Like it hasn't brought me any good." And then the boat tips and he falls in, and he kind of gets carried with the current, but he gets brought back. And Benedict chastises him a little bit and says, "This is what happens when you criticize or speak ill of Scythy gifts in a Scythy river." And they eventually reach Dai Chiquiza, and they kind of go underneath these bridges that are called the gates. So there's the gate of cranes, the gate of foxes, roosters. They go through each successive gates, which marks another checkpoint leading to Dai Chiquiza. And I'll just read this description because Dai Chiquiza is one of the more visceral set pieces in the series. It says, "It is a forest of impossibly graceful towers, set like a jeweled puzzle within the larger forest of trees. The Scythy city flanking the river on either side seemed to grow out of the very soil. It seemed the forest's own dream realized in subtle stone, 100 shades of green and white, in pale summer sky blue. It was an immense thicket of needle-thin stone, of gossamer walkways like bridges of spiderwebs, of filigreed tower tops and mirror nets reaching up into the high treetops to catch sun on their faces like icy flowers." I mean, this is one reason why I love Ted Williams, this wonderful descriptive prose. So they get into Dai Chiquiza, and as they start to unpack, Simon hears a whistling sound and an arrow. All of a sudden, these kind of figures appear before them, and it's Ingen Jegger, kind of the black cloaked man that we have seen before. And Benedict says, "Okay, come on, let's get back to the boat." And they kind of an ignition of fire happens and catches into the boat. And Benedict tells them to run, and as Simon is running, he hears another movement of arrows. Maria gets his attention, and he turns around, and he sees Benedict fall to the ground. And that is the very dark note that chapter 27 leaves off on. And of course, as you may wonder, the cover art there with Kantaka, Maria on the side, Simon carrying Benedict with an arrow to the chest. We have now kind of reached that scene that is depicted on the cover. So that's the end of chapter 27. There are a few spoiler things that I think I'll talk about. So spoilers from here on out. Again, as I mentioned, I love the moments of levity. I love Simon all of a sudden finding himself attracted to Miriamel and just all the things that he tries to do to impress her. I'm willing to bet that that's also part of the reason why he started singing as well. Tracking. And that's what's so great is that their relationship throughout the whole scope of the series, because, I mean, we're talking about the future king and queen of Osten here. And that's why I think one of the big things why I love this series so much is because of this generational growth that you can see, a growth over a significant period of time thanks to the sequel series. And just watching them now as they're 2 15-year-olds and later into the last King of Osten when they're in their early 50s, and 35 years later, it's just, I love the perspective that these scenes like this bring. And then, yeah, I mean, as I mentioned, we reached the cover art, and I know that we've only got a few, maybe two, it might just be two more chapters to go before we get to the final part of the book. Of course, the part the part of the book where so many things are answered, where we get the battle of, or siege of Naglamund, or whatever you want to call it, and when Sludig and Binabik and Simon, when they, and a couple other Rimmersmen whose names I'm forgetting right now, but when they go off into the mountains, and then the ice dragon, and yeah, that's just, there are so many just ultimate and fantastic set pieces and moments, all packed within the last third of the book. Like, I don't get me wrong, I love the first 2/3. I love the slower pace of this book, but it fires on all cylinders, just all at once, constantly in the last third. So I'm really looking forward to as us rereaders know, to getting to all those great reveals and great scenes in the last third of this book. So, chapter 27, Gossamer Towers. If you've read it, let me know what you think, and I will see you guys next time.